Hey, welcome to some tutorials on matrices. So this is like an ACT thing, guys. Normally we wouldn't bother doing this in Algebra 2, but going to be taking the ACT at some point, so we're going to give you a little background information. So first of all, how do you identify a matrix? You identify a matrix by its rows, how many rows it has, and how many columns. So this first one up here that says 2 by 2, that means that there are 2 rows and there are 2 columns. So these guys would be rows going left to right. And up and down, therefore, must be the columns. So there are 1, 2 columns. Now notice the gap in between. So there's a problem down below somewhere that has a plus sign in between, which means it would be just 1 row. So I would assume you guys could figure out the other 2 based on what we just did there. So middle one has 3 rows going left and right, 2 columns, and vice versa for that last one. So that's how we identify them. So number 1, the first example down here, we would say both these matrices are 2 by 2s. So they have 2 rows and 2 columns. So this looks confusing, but it's not. It's actually pretty darn easy. As soon as you stick an equal sign in between a set of matrices, that means the cells must be equal. And what we mean by cell is -3 in this particular matrix is in row 1, column 1, which means whatever is in row 1 and column 1 of the other one better be equal. And obviously -3 and -3 are equal. So if I move on to this guy, which is row 1, column 2, whatever is in row 1, column 2 of the other matrix, they better be equal. Okay, well, we don't know what x is, so that's the goal here, is to solve for the variables. But that upper right corner has to be equal to the upper right corner. And it's just a matter of solving like normal. So how do you get rid of the 8? You would divide. Okay, now I have an unreduced fraction here, but you could go decimals if you want. Decimals are just fine for these. So if you punched out 4 divided by 8 on the calculator, you get 0.5. So we'll go decimals just for kicks. So bottom left corner, so this guy right here would be row 2, column 1. Whatever's in row 2, column 1, they have to be equal. So x plus y in that bottom left corner has to be equal to -5, which is in the bottom left corner of the other matrix. And then you solve it. So notice this guy has 2 variables. So we better know what one of these variables is, or we're going to be kind of cooked to try to figure out the other one. But we do. We just figured out that x was 0.5. So I can substitute him in. And then I just solve. So how do you get the positive 0.5 to the other side? You would subtract him. Pick up a calculator if you have to. And we got -5.5. That's it. It's that easy. So on number 2, now one thing you might want to do is you might want to pick out any that have more than one variable in it, like this guy right here had the x plus y, which is both. So I wouldn't want to start with that guy. But on number 4, if you check it out, there's none of these cells have more than one variable. So I can start with that upper left corner. That's row 1, column 1. And he's got to be equal to whatever is in row 1, column 1 in the other one, which is in 9. So you might be saying to yourself, wow, this actually ends up being pretty easy, because if you can solve simple equations, you're right. It's actually cake. So we move the 3 by adding it. I got 12. How do we get rid of the 4? We divide it. I got 3. So you just move on. Upper right corner, upper right corner. And there's an equal sign in the middle of the 2 matrices, which implies they must be equal. And the only way they can be equal is if I solve and get -5 for an answer. So y, not v, is -5. So you could say, well, what about this guy right here? Well, 7, he's in row 2, column 1. Row 2, column 1 over here is 7. Well, 7 equals 7. There would be no reason for me to solve that because there's no variable to figure out. But in the bottom right corner, I got a 13. And in the bottom right corner, I got a 2z plus 1. Solve it. How do you get the 1 to the other side? Subtract it. Solve it. How do you get rid of the 2? Divide. And you got them. Now, as far as I'm concerned, this is good for answers. You've indicated, or we found all the variables, all the missing variables. But this is actually the true way to write a matrix answer when you have more than one variable. So you treat them kind of like coordinates, just have to put them in alphabetical order. So we found out that the x was 3, we found out that the y was -5, and we found out that the z was 7. So like a three-dimensional set of coordinates. So whatever the variables are, you just do them in alphabetical order. So let me go back over to number 1. Found out x was 0.5. We found out y was -5.5. And there you go. So a better way to write the final answers would be like this. All right, that's solving for a variable in a matrix. You might see something like that on an ACT test, pretty easy. Now on number 3, so it'd be really tempting to say there is 2 rows, and you might be thinking there's 2 columns. But check out number 4. There is an f plus h in row 1, column 1 right here. But then there's a gap, which indicates here comes a second column. And here's a gap, which indicates here comes a third column. So if you look back on that first one, well, there's no gap. There's a plus sign. So that's one whole term right there in the middle. So x plus 3y is in its own cell. It's got its own column. So that is a 2 by 1 matrix. But to solve it, we would still do the same thing, and we'd say, hey, what's in the top row? X plus 3y, sorry. And what's in the top row of the other one? -13. What's in the bottom row of the one? And what's in the bottom row of the other one? So there's no x's and y's to plug in like the previous problem. So you're going to have to break out some information that you learned somewhere back in Chapter 2. So systems of equations. Do you remember the substitution method, the elimination method? And you could graph these if you wanted to. I'm not going to go that far. I'm going to do the elimination method for no particular reason, just because I like it better. Remember, you're allowed to change an equation any way you want, just as long as you do it to both sides. So if I multiply by -3, that is legal, as long as I multiply everything by -3. So -3 times -13 is 39. I'm going to rewrite the other equation back underneath. And I'm going to add down and solve. So do you remember this? Add down. Add my y's down. I got -8y, and the x's canceled. And that's the whole point. Then you could solve and divide by -8. And I get -5. So I could plug the -5 back in, and I'll plug them in right there. So that bottom equation would say 3x with a -5 where the y was equals 1. Move the 5 by adding it. Get rid of the 3 by dividing it. And I got 2. So there's my 2 answers. So I got a 2 for x. I get a -5 for y. Yeah, I'm going to run out of time probably on number 4, guys, but I'm going to go ahead and start it. It's just the same thing. There's just a whole lot more going on. But again, the one thing you want to look for is this. This guy has 2 variables. I'm not going to start with him. I'm not going to start with him. I might start with this. Well, you can start with any one you want. So I'm going to start with this upper right corner and that upper right corner, and I'll set those equal to one another. So row 1, column 3 equals row 1, column 3, and then I just solve. So it's really easy. You just have to pick them out and find the right ones. So, and you could even cross them off like, hey, I did that one. So I'm going to find something else that's pretty easy to do. Well, let's see. How about this guy? The 2h in the lower right corner and the 16 in the lower right corner. Just set them equal to one another and solve. Okay, now at some point you're going to have to pick up those ones that have 2 variables. So I could say, well, look, I just figured out what h was. And this guy up here has an h in it, so why not pick that one out? So I'm getting low on time. This is going to be my last one. I'm going to assume you can handle it from here. So f plus h, but I just figured out what h is, so I'll plug in the 8. And in this same upper corner is an 11. Solve it by subtracting. And I got 3. So it's just a matter of you setting all the other ones equal to one another. I would have to set this guy equal to this guy, plug some numbers in, solve it. I would have to set the 6 equal to that guy, plug some numbers in, and solve it. Thanks for watching.